Good morning and welcome to Ed's World, where it's always morning, even in the afternoon. I am your host, Jay Edgar, and I am joined once again by the mysterious face that you see over to my left, Anavultus. Welcome back to Ed's World.
Well, thank you for having me.
How was your day so far? I know we're
I'd
winding down
say
to the
it's
end.
it's been pretty good.
It's good. We got a lot to get to today, but before we get started, there are a couple things that have just cropped up in the last few minutes and come to my attention here. One of the first things that we need to talk about is the fact, and I'm a car guy. Everybody in the world knows that I'm a car guy. I'm the kind of guy who, I enjoy Ford. You've all seen my Ford t-shirts when I do my solo videos here, and I'm the kind of person who would love to see another fastback Mustang, but I looked at this Mach E that's been trending all day here, and that may be promoted by Ford, and this is not what had in mind when we said we wanted a fastback Mustang again. This is a two-door Edge, so let's just get this one back on the drawing board and change the name of it and get rid of it again because that is not a Mustang. What do you think?
Well, all I say is that for vehicles that have as few electronic parts as possible.
Unfortunately, with emissions, we can't get away from that anymore, unless we abolish the
Yeah.
federal government and get rid of the EPA. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, unfortunately. One last thing that just kind of popped up here a little bit before I went over and I got my haircut is it appears, and I'm going to take this with a grain of salt because it came from InfoWars, that the food taster for the White House is now in the hospital for ingesting a slow release poison that may have been intended to go to the president. The president has also gone to the hospital to get tested for all of this, but of course it's InfoWars, so you do have to take everything with a grain of salt with that. But unfortunately, I mean, I've discussed things with people like Seawall and the Deplorable Batcave that I think politically we are kind of almost at a point where we're ready to have an assassination attempt or sadly an assassination. And let's hope to God that this doesn't become Franz Ferdinand 2.0. I know I kind of sprung that on you and didn't put it in the show notes, but it just kind of showed up here probably about 20 minutes before I left to go get my haircut, which was an hour before we went live. So, have you
Well,
seen anything on
I
that?
would
Or
I would like to say that historically speaking, there have been assassination attempts with less political tension in the country anyway. So I would say that Uh, the reason why they are less common, even though political tension is higher, is probably because of how intense security has developed.
yeah, that's true. But and like I say, I haven't been able to vet this from anything else. It was something that Vanessa Bourbon put up on her Twitter page, and I looked at it. I read through it, but before I verify anything, it's already gone through three sources for me. So it's something we definitely need to keep an eye on, and we definitely will be keeping an eye on over at Freedom Scoop. Looks like we've got a full show today. There was a shooting in California and it showed up in the news and it kind of disappeared out of the news just as quickly. So we'll talk about that and why it might have dropped out of the news. The Supreme Court will be hearing DACA. I actually already heard DACA. They decided that they're going to hear a case for this. We will sit down and discuss what DACA is, what this could mean for the act, and what it could mean for the country if the act is either kept or ended. Impeachment 2020 is coming through, and we've got a round of testimony coming. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk about what happened there. I've got about a 7-minute highlight reel of some of the testimony. We'll watch that and we'll talk about that. And as if we didn't, or we weren't so worried rather about what was going on with the impeachment, we also have a presidential race coming up, so we'll talk about that, including the fact that Face the Nation has come forward and said that some of the candidates may be too far left to be voted in a general election. We'll watch that video, we'll talk about that. Finally, California is introducing independent contractor laws that could, according to Tim Pool's estimate, destroy 70,000 jobs. This has been something that I've been harping on ever since I came into policy and started talking about that. So we will talk about what's going on there. It'll be all of this and more over on Ed's World. Thanks for watching us over on YouTube. We are live on YouTube, DLive, Twitch, Periscope for Twitter, and Facebook. If you can't catch us live on any of those platforms, we will also be on demand on YouTube and BitChute. And if you can't catch us live on any of those or prefer to take us on the go, we are on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Please remember, if you are watching or listening to this rather on iTunes, leave us that 5-star rating and a good review. That always helps us move up the charts. Ed's World is proudly partnered with the Freedom Scoop Media Group, and our merch shop is open. Make sure you go over there and check out great items like this hand-etched Freedom Scoop mug. That's one of our proud items here. You can have my favorite, the Unashamed Second Amendment Supporter t-shirt. That's over there. You can go pick up one of those. Or if you really, really, really want to punish yourself, you can always pick up the Generational Gap t-shirt over there. And we've got some other merch that's coming, some merch for my show, some merch for Stephen Ignoramus' show, and many other merchandise items over there. You can find the link for freedomscoop.com in the description below. And I won't tell anybody you used it if you do decide you want to punish yourself and buy the Generational Gap t-shirt, but you can use that promo code JEdgar at checkout and get an extra 15% off your entire order. After the lengthy introduction, it's always time to find out a bit about our guests. So, you've been here probably a couple months ago, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for the new audience that's coming in?
All right, I'm Anavultus. I have made YouTube videos for a number of years now, and in the past, I used to do more gaming content. More recently, I've been doing more political content, especially when it concerns questions of political philosophy. Toward that end, I have ended up developing an entirely new political ideology, and I always try to see things from a perspective of realism, as well as acknowledging the facts and trying to work things through and trying to think outside of the box, really.
Well, and you said you've been at this for a while, and I know you've made the shift out of gaming content into political and philosophical content, but how did you decide to get into alternative media to begin with?
Well, I think what really brought me into this was the 2016 election. At that time, I was starting to. I had a show where I tried to do a bit of a podcast, and I thought that political issues were a bit relevant at the time. And the whole election with Donald Trump ended up bringing into me a sort of questioning of how exactly we choose our leaders and what qualities we want in our leaders, and the political processes are that develop all this. And I think that's what led me to start having deeper thoughts into politics, and going on from there.
Awesome. And you've got a special event that's actually coming up here, and all of the Freedom Scoop Media Group has a special event here, but you're going to possibly be almost on center stage with this because you released a video last week, I believe it was, debunking or at least commenting on a more prominent YouTuber's video on natural rights. So tell us a bit about that and tell us a bit about what's upcoming with that, for as much as you know or much as you can release at this point.
Okay. So Matt Christensen is another popular YouTuber, a lot more popular than I am. And he had released a video where he had been, he essentially responded to some questions that brought to him by some of his audience regarding natural rights. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go in and take a look at this because I had already been thinking about natural rights, and I'm actually in the process of writing a bit of a pamphlet in preparation for a debate with John from GenGap that addresses the issue of natural rights in part. So based on that, I ended up looking at his video and seeing the arguments that he made, And I tried to go point by point, pointing out where I thought that the reasoning was off and where natural rights really do not compute, at least not in the way that Matt Christensen presented them.
And it looks like you said you will be debating with John on that will be on the 6th of December, I believe, for their charity live stream. They're going for 12 hours that day. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. I and John, of course, have different political views, and uh, I decided that maybe we could debate each other, and we decided that we both decided that that was acceptable. So we had to come together and ask a question to essentially make a thesis on the debate on what exactly is one of the root issues of our differences politically. And ultimately, I came to the question of, and my thesis is that justice is derived from authority, which is also contrary to the idea of natural rights in a way. And from that, we're going to be discussing that as well, in a way.
All right, and make sure that you check that out. There will be many Twitter links and Discord links, of course, for you to reach out and catch that on the 6th of December. Make sure that you get in with the generational gap and help out with the charities that they're trying to support. I believe this is going to be for Toys for Tots, and we don't want those tots to go without toys for Christmas. So make sure you get in, make sure you donate to the GoFundMe that they will be setting up to do this. There may be some challenges that they have. I know last year they tried to get $500, and John was going to shave his beard for that. I'm not sure what they have set up for that, but John may be in the live chat here. He may tell us about that. I thought I saw him a bit ago, but it's going to be a great show. I'm probably going to be there. I won't be in person like I had originally planned, but I'm going to be there. So
Yeah.
check that
I'm
out.
reading the live chat right now, and apparently John forgot about our debate. Well, there's still plenty of time to get ready.
Well, let's check in with the live chat here before we get started. If you're new to the show, we will check in with live chat in between all topics. So we will read questions on the air, answer them. If you are over on Facebook and Twitter, you actually can't get into the live chat from there, but there are handy links either on my Twitter page or in the description of this on Facebook where you can go and catch up with Twitch, YouTube, or DLive, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have over there. So, looks like John is in the live chat, and he did indeed forget that we were going to have the debate. Uh, and he also put the wrong promo code in there, so we'll get that adjusted, no problem. And April Hart is in and has recognized that it is Anavultus. So thanks for supporting the show, everybody. We'll check back with you after the California shooting. So, on Thursday, a student went into a Santa Clarita high school and just started shooting. It appears that he was shooting indiscriminately. It appears that, was it 3 dead, 10 injured? I believe was the
Yeah,
final count.
from what I heard, he started, I guess, shortly after all the students had gotten to the school, so it was in the morning.
Well, if you're going to do something like that, you almost have to start right from the beginning. Otherwise, there's that much more chance that you'll get caught throughout the day. But
That's true. Yeah.
so it looks like we got a lot of press coverage on this almost immediately as soon as this happened. But the press coverage started to die out a bit. You know, I listen to news podcasts almost all day, every day. I haven't heard more than a couple little clips about this off of this. I look at some of the mainstream. I haven't heard much
Well,
about this at all. But
could be because we just now had another shooting in California shortly thereafter.
yep, shortly thereafter, there was another shooting there. And then it looks like I caught breaking news a little bit earlier today that there was another shooting in an Oklahoma Walmart. So
Yeah.
it's almost eerie to think, and I hate to bring up the tinfoil on this, but it's almost eerie to think that the tinfoily ones are right, and the only time that either these shootings happen or we hear about them is when things aren't going politically well for the Democrats in Washington. We'll talk a bit about what happened on these hearings in a bit, but that does seem to correlate the time, and it seems to correlate the time and time again. As soon as something's going bad for them, we start hearing all these stories again. But
Well, I cannot confirm whether that's true,
yeah,
but yeah,
it's just an
I'd
eerie
have to
coincidence for me.
I'd have to see a real big study showing that, but maybe that's a worthwhile project. I don't know.
Well, we'll talk a bit about here why I think this came out of the news. So it looks like instead of having the classic AR rifle that everyone seems to blame every time there's a shooting, this shooting was undertaken by a 45 handgun that appeared to have belonged to the shooter's father but was not registered. Of course, in California, all firearms need to be registered to their proper owner at all times. So this was multiple instances of broken laws on top of everything else. But one of the other things that I saw in this was the fact that, just like every other shooting that I see, bullying seems to be one of the first citations that comes forward as a motive. So I don't know how you feel about that on bullying and school shootings together, but what did you think on that?
Well, when it concerns bullying, I would say that obviously bullying does inspire negative emotions in people. But
Mm-hmm.
if you go back 100 years, I wouldn't say that bullying was less common, but school shootings were a lot less common.
Mm-hmm. Well, I talked about this a bit when I did my ed talk this past weekend, which did wind up getting scrubbed out of YouTube. I don't know why it was that my restream wouldn't go back to YouTube, but I was talking a bit about the fact that, back in when I was younger, when I was in high school, right after Columbine happened, that was the one incident that happened. We only had the one, but at the time, bullying stopped as soon as you left school. It didn't follow you when you went home, and nowadays with smartphone technology and internet-based messaging apps, bullying doesn't stop once you're done with school. It goes round the clock at home, through the smartphone, through everything else. So I think that may be a part of the reason that we're seeing some of the rise in this. What do you think on that? Uh oh, we lost audio. Anavultus, I don't have any audio for you. Bear with us a moment. It appears we're having some technical issues. Try again. Yeah, I got no audio here. Hang on for just a moment, and I'm gonna put the blank screen up and figure out what's going on.
Can we proceed?
Hmm.
All right. Tell me when we're live again.
Oh, we never stopped being live. I just muted
Uh,
microphones.
Okay. Okay. So,
We are back.
I okay. I'll continue. As I was saying, I think I'm having a bit of a boomer moment on this because I don't have a smartphone, so I'm not really involved in that. But what I would say is that today we have a lot more support groups and advocacy groups for all these bullying issues.
Hmm.
So it seems that to me that I don't think bullying itself is what the problem is here. I think it has to do more with parenting, perhaps.
Well, I can see the ups and downs to that as well. Just kind of looking at the situation that we're in, I can definitely see where that's a possibility. I mean, the parents, that was part of the problem. I thought when we were younger, if the bullies wanted to continue to bully after you got sent home or after you went home, it wasn't even the smartphone, just any cell phone at all. There wasn't really that much of it there. When I was in high school, only a handful of people had a cell phone at all. So if you wanted to make contact with somebody, you had to go through the parents first because that was usually who answered the phone first. So everything was essentially screened. And now I think that with the smartphone generation or even with the cell phone generation, people can make that direct call to somebody without, just go and bypass the parents entirely before any of this happens. And I mean, who wants to go to the parents and look weak?
Yeah. It could be, but of course, in this particular case, I would actually have to see if this person was actually being perhaps gossiped about online or directly bullied online in some sense before I could actually make a conclusion that is related to it.
Well, and that was, obviously we don't know all the details of what was going on. There was, when you first did a Google search on the Santa Clarita shooting, the first thing that you saw was what was the motive. That was one of the first things that came up. So I don't think we really know what the motive is at this point, and some of that is going to be, I think, hidden because of the way our criminal justice system works. So all we have is speculation right now, and it might not even be a position of bullying. So one of the issues that I saw with this, of course, is anytime any shooting happens, is we have to ask ourselves if this is going to be a push for gun control or not. And like I said in the beginning, this doesn't really fit the narrative that goes along with gun control. This wasn't a rifle at all, much less a scary black composite rifle. It was a handgun. The student was a non-white student, which obviously that doesn't really play into me, but the news media is going to take that and run with it. And there's already heavy gun regulation in California. So any act other than, just the murder is also a violation of California law. And another law on top of it isn't going to change anything. So what do you think on that?
Yeah, I would agree that this is a shooting that the gun regulations could not have prevented. Because and in my view, if people are going to hurt each other, and people do want to hurt each other in many cases, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to find other ways to do it. For because what we see in Britain, where there is a greater success in getting rid of a lot of these guns, you see that there's a lot of knife attacks and people throwing acid at each other in London. So it's not as if getting rid of the guns will cause the violence to go away.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Britain even went as far as to try and ban certain types of knives for everyday use. The hatred is always there. It's going to find a way to do it. It's just a matter of now how do we prosecute the hatred and the thought rather than the object, and that's something I think we do need to take into consideration.
Yeah, and what I think is that a lot of these issues are issues that are very complex and issues that can be different in different geographies. By that I mean that it's not as if the whole country is having an issue here. It could just be parts of a country, and the parts of a country that are having an issue could each be having different types of issues that lead to this. So I think the best thing to do is rather than trying to solve this with the one size fits all approach that then limits our freedoms to simply go on the local level, give the locals the actual tools that they need to police their communities.
Hmm. What kind of local tool would you suggest on something like this? Because I know the left is going to run out and say we need answers and we need them now. I
Well,
don't
what
know.
I'm going to say is that if you do want answers and you want them now, putting things locally will actually mean that you can actually get issues resolved faster. So if you go to the city council uh, and there's a problem, it can be debated within a day and solved, as opposed to going to, let's say, where it might take a month. So if they want fast solutions, going locally is probably the better option. Also, as for what the local government can do, I would say that the local government should have more discretionary powers. And unfortunately, what we see is that the federal government has been slowly appropriating these powers, which means that if you're the mayor in a town and something goes wrong, you have to wait for the federal government to do something before you can actually try to solve the root problems of this issue, or even just the state government. In large states like California, that can be a big hindrance.
Hmm. Well, and California's got just as bad of a bureaucracy problem as Washington D.C. does, mostly because it is so large.
Yeah, as we'll be seeing in one of our upcoming topics as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. So I don't know. This is something that's still developing. I got this feeling that it's just going to fall out of the news. We're not going to see anything more out of this. So I don't know. I mean, do we try and make a policy prescription, or do we just let this fall to the wayside and no justice for the kids?
What we have to do is we need to actually have the police investigated, as they are probably doing right now.
Hmm.
And instead of trying to jump the gun and try to solve the symptoms of the problem it is, we actually wait for the police to conclude their investigation.
Hmm.
And then we might actually have something that is actionable. Because in many of these events where something happens and someone dies, people are all too fast to rush to solve a problem. For example, you had the issue with the deaths related to and hospitalizations related to vaping, where then the governments decided to get together and we're going to ban exotic flavors as if
Hmm.
that actually solves the problem, instead of just trying to slap a band-aid on it.
Well, yeah, and I mean the ones that came out of the exotic flavors, all of those came out of basically illegal usage to begin with because people were brewing THC flavors and vapors at home without the FDA being involved. And oh, you brewed it at home, and it's so funny. Now it doesn't work the way it was intended to work. So, yeah, instead of addressing the actual problem, they're trying to just make a sweeping ban on everything.
Yeah, it's these one size fits all regulations that ignore the situation on the ground and they ignore actual conclusions that we can find this, because it's sometimes it's actually very important to consider these things slowly and to actually develop our ideas on how to solve these problems over a period of time, so that actually reach a consensus on what actually is a reasonable response rather than simply a knee-jerk reaction.
And, it's the other thing, too. When this first happened, I looked at this and I said, we're not going to hear about this anymore. This is going to get a day of coverage and we're going to forget about it. You remember the Santa Fe shooting?
Yes, yes, I do.
Yeah, nobody else does.
Well, when I say I remember it, what I mean is that I remember that it happened,
Yeah.
but because the news cycle moves so quickly, what I have is a lot of essentially uh, something new always happens, and
Yep.
then the media moves to it. Yeah,
It happened and it disappeared almost instantly. And I do believe as well it didn't fit the narrative. It was a handgun and a shotgun. I was looking up that case. That kid is actually not going to face any charges right now.
Yeah,
Insanity is what they're going to throw on him. Unfit to
insanity.
unfit to face trial.
Yeah, sometimes I think certain doctors are overeager to diagnose certain things.
Well, it's because they have their hands in the pockets of certain lawyers.
Yeah.
At least that's speculative. I don't know if that's actually what's happening or. All right, let's check back in with the live chat here. See what we've got going on here. Uh, Yamafago, teach kids to fight and they won't need to use a gun. Also, Kid Fight Club, hell yes. Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah.
Vega is in the chat. He says,
I
"Yo."
fight kids all the time.
Yeah.
In martial arts, that is. Yeah.
Vega has issues with cops harassing him for dancing in a sewer drain. John says they can take his vape from his cold dead hands. That'll be awesome. No, no, John, we're not going down that road. I just caught that message. We are not going down that road. No triple brackets here. Get that tinfoil off your head.
Yeah, no Irish conspiracy theories, please.
All right. So I've got that. Let's go ahead and talk about this the impeachment here. Let me get the notes up. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about DACA first. So let's go ahead and talk about DACA. So this past week on Tuesday, the Supreme Court voted that they are going to hear arguments in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Act that Obama put in place with an executive order. Now, for those of you who don't remember, or this is something that's come and gone numerous times out of the news cycle already, what the DACA program is a program. It was an executive order in which Barack Obama chose by bureaucracy to not enforce immigration laws on certain arrivals who came as minors or very young children, especially those who had never known their home country because they were so young when they arrived. This is cited by many people as unconstitutional. Unfortunately, it is perfectly constitutional, and by the way that he did it, it seems like he did it for a purpose. But what I saw out of this, and I'm still working up a script to make a solo video on this, is the fact that DACA was put in place because they wanted to use this as a club, the Dreamers, so much they're called, as a club to wield against Republicans who would want to get rid of the act by flick of the executive pen, leaving the DACA children in a state of immigration limbo in which they are neither legal nor illegal. But what has been your experience seeing DACA for firsthand? I know you're probably in a place that's inhabited by a lot of Cuban immigrants who may be in the program.
Well, I don't think I've actually met that many immigrants. I think it largely happens more in farther west. At least most immigrants we get here in Florida are from the north.
Okay. Canadian?
But there's also Puerto Ricans, but they're already citizens, so they don't really count as immigrants.
Ah, snowbirds.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, snowbirds, people fleeing the islands. Yeah, but yeah, there is a sizable Cuban community as well.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of them left Cuba before DACA would apply,
Okay.
because DACA actually has a time window for when it applies. You have to be born on June 18th, 1981 or later for DACA to apply to you. So Cuban immigrants are older than that, at
Which
least first generation anyway.
which blows my mind absolutely because I mean you're almost 40 years old at that point.
Well, you could be, but of course the youngest is June 15th, 2007. That's the other cutoff point.
Yeah.
So anyone born between those two dates can apply for DACA along with some other provisions, of course. You have to have lived continuously since June 15th, 2007 in the US. You have to have been present in the US June 15th, 2012.
Hmm.
And at that time of making a request for consideration, deferred action with USCIS, had you be illegal for it to apply to you. So individuals on green cards don't count for it. You have to have completed high school or a GAD, or have been honorably discharged from the armed forces, enrolled in a school. And you also cannot have been of a felony or serious misdemeanors, or three or more minor misdemeanors, and have to not be considered a threat to national security or public safety. The qualifications for DACA apply to you, and you also have to have been in the country before you were 16 as well.
Which, and I have no problem with the fact that there's so many stipulations on a program which is essentially skirting the illegal immigration. That's, one of the few moral things that's in the law, because obviously you're going to have the felons up here that are trying to skirt the immigration system as well. Whereas we have these kids that came up here as kids, essentially, have never known their home country, and have been working here since they were kids. I mean, there's a place in our society for these kids. I have no problem with the fact that they're here. It's just the matter of the problem I have with all of this is the fact that they're sitting in limbo right now, and anything the federal government does is going to affect them. It's going to affect employers. It's going to affect our economy,
Here's
good
what
or
I
bad.
say.
What's that?
What I say is that they should have because the government has been generous to them and has given them promises.
Hmm.
It would be a bit of a betrayal for the government to simply just abandon them. So what I think is that the government should give an option of either get a green card or leave.
Hmm.
And in that case, it means that they're just not automatically deported, as is the fear of many of these individuals who maybe have established careers in the US and are taxpayers, because even illegal immigrants are required to pay taxes.
Hmm.
Um, but so in my view, what should happen, they should have either an option for a green card, or they should be expelled from the country. Well, deported, I think, is a better term.
Well, and that's what I always said too. I mean, we're at a point now with the fact that they have to think about this every 6 months. What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to my career? Even if they all got deported, that would be more moral at this point than just leaving them on DACA and leaving them on limbo. But I think the best course of action right now, both politically and, like you said, morally on this, for the fact that they've been here for so long and have careers here, is get them a path to citizenship.
Yeah, put them on a green card, and then we'll see what happens from there.
Because, I mean, they had to fill out the form to be eligible for the program, so we've got all their information on file already. So, yeah, a green card would just be an extra step.
Yeah, because from a green card, then you can make a path to citizenship from there.
Hmm.
Uh, and I'm not saying that they should automatically be given citizenship, because that would be unfair to the legal immigrants that spend the time outside of a country applying for citizenship, and it takes many, many years for them to get it. I would say that giving them an easy path to the green card, that is to the DACA individuals, would be fine, because these individuals are individuals that, uh, in order to apply for the program, have to not be felons or not be involved in serious misdemeanors. So, in other words, these are people that are not arrested for repeated crimes.
Right.
And yeah, so I would say that although it is a problem that they are here, it's a government oversight problem and a problem because of immigration. What we need to do is we need to close the loopholes that allowed them to get here in the first place,
Hmm.
and then deal with them that are in the country by dealing with them in a way that does not betray what the government has promised them, also does not betray our own citizens and the people who immigrate legally.
One of the things that bothers me the most about this is the fact that Democrats, especially those in Congress, are fighting tooth and nail to keep this in place. And a part of what bothers me about that is the fact that they are the ones that are in position to enshrine this as an actual law rather than an executive order that can get flicked away with a pen, just like that.
Yeah, they do treat it like a law. Now, of course, there is the Dream Act, and that's something else.
Hmm.
But if Donald Trump wanted to solve this problem, he could.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because he has the power. Now, of course, I would say that this shouldn't have been up to the president exactly in the first place. Uh, but Donald Trump could solve the problem in the same way that the problem got created. That is by making an executive order that actually fixes these things.
Hmm.
So,
Well, and again, it's most people assume, especially like if Jeb would have taken hold in 2016, which God help us had he had, we'd be having a whole slew of different problems right now. So if we got another Bush or maybe a Ted Cruz or something out there, the assumption there would be that if DACA were to end, that they were just going to go and deport everybody. That's why I'm saying, like, I think you're going the same direction with that, where you could solve the problem, throw everybody for a loop on top of that, and just okay, your DACA form is now your form for your green card. Welcome to your work visa.
yeah, that's what they should do,
Hmm.
because again, in order to apply for DACA, they're not allowed to be criminals.
Hmm.
So in that way, we've already, in a way, vetted them, and they've been in the country their entire adult lives. So there you go.
All right. Do you think this gets overturned by the Supreme Court?
DACA, whether the Supreme Court is going to overturn it.
Well, they're not going to overturn it, but right now the precedent in the Supreme Court is the fact that it's the Donald is unable to get rid of it. Is the decision that's sitting in the Supreme Court right now, but that's what they're voting to rehear right now is whether or not he can just flick it away like that.
Well, that it would be very silly if the Supreme Court voted that something that got established by executive order cannot be disestablished by executive order.
Hmm.
Uh, that would mean a complete nightmare if you ever wanted to actually pass reforms in the country. It would mean all the hundreds and the thousands of executive orders that are out there all have the same authority as, well, not the same, but have an authority that the president cannot overturn in the same way that the president cannot overturn acts of Congress. And that would be, I think, a real big problem and could lead to eventually a point of gridlock when it concerns the executive office.
All right. Well, let's check in with the live chat here. Um, John says Cubans get citizenship if they can reach the shore. Same with Haitians. I guess I didn't realize that.
Yeah, yeah, because they are considered asylum seekers.
Okay.
Because Cuba has a dictatorship.
Okay. Seawall is here with his half track into the chat. He claims that DACA has a slew of criminals on the rolls. I guess I wasn't.
Well, normally speaking, they shouldn't. Is what I'm saying. I'm saying that ideally, if DACA actually followed its own provisions, as is in the actual DACA, then they wouldn't have felons, individuals that have committed serious misdemeanors, or individuals that have committed fair more other misdemeanors, and individuals that are not considered to pose a threat to national security or public safety. So if that actually followed, then those individuals would be deported.
Hmm.
They would not have deferred action under DACA anyway. But of course, the government is very good at not following its own laws, so
No.
that's another problem.
Well, and then he says, Sewell says that an example should be set, and we should just go out and deport them all anyway. And politically, now, legally, yes, I believe that is true, but politically, that does not seem expedient right now.
Well, the problem is that the implication of giving them deferred action has it in a way. I believe they were trying to create a path to citizenship,
Hmm.
and it didn't actually end up going through. So, in other words, the individuals that actually properly adhere to DACA, in my view,
Hmm.
uh, should, in my view, be allowed to stay uh, under the provision that they can actually follow the laws of the U.S. and get a green card, and then after that, follow the regular immigration process. But of course, individuals that actually break the provisions of DACA and individuals that otherwise don't have any other reason to be here should be deported in their entirety, in my view.
Well, and my problem with just going out and deporting them all right away is the fact it's the same thing with transcript, and we'll be talking about that, I think, the next topic here. The You can't play the game the Democrats want you to play by their rules. What I mean by that is the way when DACA was set up, it was set up so that the next Republican president would deport all the kids. That's the rules because Republicans are supposed to hate immigrants. So you can't play the game by their rules, and sometimes you have to bend the rules in order to take the political expediency out of it. Yes, under legal circumstances, I believe you're absolutely right. They should have been deported, but we're past the point right now. And yeah, if you go ahead and deport everybody, we kiss the country goodbye and prepare to hail your socialist dictators. Essentially, is where I'm getting at this.
Yeah. Now, of course, DACA recipients who are still children were in a decreasing number, presumably, as DACA naturally will phase out eventually. Um, those individuals, if their parents are deported, I believe that they should keep the family together and deport with them. Uh, I think that should be better than trying to split them off or something.
Well, that's what I have on this, and we could possibly now, with Seawall in the chat, go on to this forever, but we do have to keep the show moving along here. So, looks
So
like,
I do believe that this problem that should be avoided in the future again.
oh, absolutely. But there again, if it's set up by Democrat rules, then they're going to set it up to have this problem now. That's the reason that it's there, so that we
Yeah,
have to have this problem now. But let's talk
yeah,
about the
yeah.
impeachment.
Okay, the impeachment.
So the first rounds of hearings were this past week, and I've got a highlight reel set up here. But I mean, from the most part, from what I've read or from what I've watched on this, from what I've heard from other pundits talking about this, from what I've read on news articles from this is going absolutely nowhere.
It is going absolutely nowhere. That's right. Because here's let me lay out the exact accusation and what exactly needs to be proven for the accusation to be true. The accusation is that there was a quid pro quo between the two presidents of the US and the Ukraine, that Donald Trump was going to withhold funds that the US Congress had appointed to give to the government of the Ukraine until the president of the Ukraine agreed to open an investigation on Hunter Biden. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
problem with trying to prove that is that in neither of the two phone calls has Donald Trump actually made any statement saying that the funding was being withheld for that reason. and none of the witnesses that have come up so far have actually provided any direct evidence for that. In other words, the accusation of a quid pro quo has zero evidence. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
there was evidence, then that is something that I they would bring out sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, and they're moving off the quid pro quo argument right now as well. Now it's turning into bribery is going to be the argument and the charge that they're going to bring against, or I'm sorry, intent to bribe.
intent to bribe.
Yes.
Well, you'd have to prove the same as with the quid pro quo.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the same situation. So even if they change the terms on what exactly they're going to call it, they'd have to prove the exact same. And if none of those physical records exist that could prove this, all that you could possibly have to prove it would be the testimony of Donald Trump himself. And if he is not willing to confess that he did any of these things, then there is zero evidence.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly where we're sitting at too with the situation we're at. As we'll see in the video, the first clip that I have brought up is the fact that one of the ambassadors, as he said right out, I didn't witness the call. Somebody told me about something that somebody else told him. And that's all that we're getting out of these testimonies right now is hearsay back and forth.
Yeah, because I read transcripts and they don't talk about the funds, which means that if they're not talking about the money, then there's relating to either the quid pro quo or the bribery accusation.
Well, I've got a little presentation here. We'll take a few minutes and watch that, and we'll just see what this was for everybody.
In a regular NSC secure video conference call on July 18th, I heard a staff person from the Office of Management and Budget say that there was a hold on security assistance to Ukraine, but could not say why. Toward the end of an otherwise normal meeting, a voice on the call, the person was off screen, said that she was from OMB and her boss had instructed her not to approve any additional spending on security assistance for Ukraine until further notice. I and others sat in astonishment. Ukrainians were fighting Russians and counted on not only the training and weapons, but also the assurance of U.S. support. All that the OMB staff person said was that the directive had come from the President to the Chief of Staff to OMB. In an instant, I realized that one of the key pillars of our strong support for Ukraine was threatened. The irregular policy channel was running contrary to the goals of long-standing U.S. policy.
Let's go back a little bit in time to.
So before we get into this next clip here, that's exactly what I said. All that he's saying is that this woman heard it from somebody on high, and nobody actually witnessed the order come down from itself. Or if they did,
Yeah.
they can't subpoena whoever it was that heard the order. They say it comes from the president, but I mean, there's no proof for that. There's no eyewitness testimony.
If there's no evidence, then they can't prove anything.
Let's keep going.
To when you first learned about this conditionality. And on September 1st, so a little more than a week before that text we just read, you sent another text to Ambassadors Sondland and Volker, which should also be on the screen in front of you. And if you could read what you wrote to them.
Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations?
And Ambassador Sondland responded, "Call me." Now, what information had you learned that prompted you to write this text message?
I had learned that in Warsaw, after the meeting Vice President Pence had with President Zelensky, Ambassador Sondland had meetings there and had described to Mr. Yermak, the assistant to President Zelensky, that the security assistance was also held pending announcement by President Zelensky in public of these investigations. Before that, I had only understood from Ambassador Sondland that the White House meeting was conditioned. And at this time, after I heard of this conversation, it struck me, it was clear to me that security assistance was also being held.
Ambassador Taylor, the gentleman asked if you could be wrong. Were you wrong when you said you had a clear understanding that President Zelensky had to commit to an investigation of Biden's before the aid got released, and the aid got released and he didn't commit to an investigation?
Mr. I was not wrong about what I told you, which is what I heard. That's all I've said. I've told you what I heard.
And that's the point. What you heard did not happen. It didn't happen. You had 3 meetings with the guy. He could have told you. He didn't announce he was going to do an investigation before the aid happened. It's not just could it have been wrong. The fact is it was wrong because it didn't happen. The whole point was you had a clear understanding that aid will not get released unless there's a commitment. Not maybe, not I think the aid might happen, and it's my hunch it's going to get released. You use clear language, clear understanding, and commitment, and those 2 things didn't happen, so you had to be wrong.
Welcome,
So, and that's part of the important part that Jim Jordan brought out is the fact that, okay, whether or not there was intent to this and whether or not it didn't happen, there was no crime committed.
Yeah. The only thing that is suspect, in my viewpoint, is the president opening up a request for an investigation independently of any active investigation in the U.S. Now, of course, Democrats were to pursue that line of logic, then they would also open up themselves to questioning in regards to the DNC's investigation that was outsourced to the Ukraine in the 2016 election, for which individuals in the Ukraine have actually been indicted for interfering in U.S. elections. There you go.
All right, let's keep going.
To year 4 of the ongoing impeachment of President Trump. I'm sorry that you have been dragged into this. I think the sign behind me says it very well. By the whistleblower's attorney, the coup has started and impeachment will follow.
As we sit here testifying, the president is...
And that's an important part too, because you remember the beginning of all this when on election night, when everything happened, the first thing people started talking about was the fact that this is going to be an impeachment. This is going to be an impeached president, and they're living and dying by the fact that they want to impeach this president, that they're dying to do it, to send the message. Well, this is my opinion talking at this point, to send the message that it's not okay for an outsider to run for an office.
The problem for the Democrats is that if this makes it to the Senate, then the Republicans will hijack the hearings to then point out all the corruption that the Democrats have been involved in the Ukraine, both during the election and at the time of Obama's involvement in the area. So they're really going under big risk here as it stands.
Well, they don't care about any risk or anything. They have to get rid of this president by any means necessary.
Yeah. So I think both parties are really trying to take advantage of this in order to push forward a narrative.
Let's keep going.
is attacking you on Twitter, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go? He goes on to say, later in the tweet, is a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. First of all, Ambassador Yovanovitch, the Senate has a chance to confirm or deny an ambassador, do they not?
Yes, advise and consent.
But would you like to respond to the president's attack that everywhere you went turned bad?
Well, I mean, I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better, for the U.S. as well as for the countries that I've served in.
In Market Watch, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff.
Well, that's part of the problem too that we're looking at when we look at all of this is they're trying to make a criminal charge into a character flaw. We saw a lot of this happen with Clinton during his impeachment.
Exactly. Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the public on their side. But the problem is that this is a hearing on whether a crime occurred. So public opinion is actually irrelevant. But both parties have taken it upon themselves to try to politicize this as much as possible in order to make use of it in the election.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a part, like you say, it's going to hit the Senate and it's going to flop because they can't get enough. We'll talk about that in a second off the video here, but I mean, you can't turn around and get enough people turned around in the Senate to get the removal, but you play these clips, you make the president look like a bad person, and now that's what people are going to carry in to the ballot box when they go there next November.
Yeah, because if it goes to the Senate, then the Republicans, they can subpoena people like Chalupa, and that could really derail the hearing for the Democrats anyway.
All right, let's finish this up here.
Said Sunday that an agreement has been reached under which the whistleblower will testify before the committee very soon. I can keep going, but again, the chairman refused to allow us to put these into the record with unanimous consent. So I've read those out, and as we know, it is important to protect whistleblowers from retaliation and from firing, and we want to make sure whistleblowers are able to come forward. But in this case, the fact that we are getting criticized by Chairman Adam Schiff for statements that he himself made early on in this process shows the duplicity and just the abuse of power that we are continuing to see. With a minute 54 seconds left, I'll yield to my colleague, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I would also add that the chairman has promised we'll get to see the transcripts. But there's still 4 people we've deposed that we have not been able to see their transcripts, have their transcripts released, and therefore the testimony they provided we're not able to use in these open hearings. If it's an open hearing, all the available testimony from depositions that has been taken by the committee should be available to be discussed for the American people to see. But no. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Hale, and 2 others, Ms. Williams, 2 others have, and another one have not yet been released.
He smeared you when you were in Ukraine. He smeared you on that phone call with President Zelensky on July 25. He is smearing you right now as you are testifying. Ambassador Yovanovitch, are the president's smears going to stop you from fighting corruption?
Well, I will continue with my work.
And if your country asks you again to fight corruption, will you still do that despite the smears?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
So that's the little what's the word? The presentation that I had off of this, and what I'm looking at. I mean, Jim Jordan has been a rock star throughout all of this, and he's tried to keep everything back grounded in fact, while people like Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell have, gone through with all of this and tried to make this back into an attack on character. And that's all that I'm seeing here is an attack on character.
Well, it's, of course, going to, in my view, ruin the reputation of a lot of the people involved from both sides of the aisle, really, because if people are making bold accusations, then it's going to come back and bite them in a ballot box and potentially in their communities as well. Well, I certainly hope that doesn't happen. That could very well happen if this becomes a divisive issue.
Yeah, because, I mean, you can't convict somebody on character alone. Do you remember a TV show called Becker? It was one of Ted Danson's
I have not
projects.
seen that one.
So, and I thought of this just now while we were watching all of this, and I was talking about the character. There was an episode, Ted Danson played a doctor, and he was a fairly foul-tempered doctor. From I think he was in Brooklyn. He had just a small practice in Brooklyn, and at one point he had taken one of his patients with a heart condition out to exercise to try and get his weight back down, so his heart condition would go away. And the patient had a heart attack while he was on the treadmill. Well, okay, some ambulance chaser in the emergency room found the patient and started a lawsuit for malpractice because of that. And it was a 3-part episode, spent the entire 3 parts trying to basically smear Dr. Becker's character by his abrasiveness, his anger, his everything else. And one of the last lines of that, because obviously he's the protagonist, he's covered by plot armor, but he won the lawsuit. But one of the last things that he said was, whether or not I'm a good person, how did he put it? Whether or not I'm a good person isn't on trial. Whether or not I'm a good doctor is, and I'll be damned if this court can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Whether or not the president is a good person isn't on trial right here. Whether or not he had some sort of business dealing that was above board or below board is what's on trial. Sorry, I interrupted you.
But that's exactly what it is. It's a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
This whole question of whether Donald Trump was rude to people or not, because everybody knows that Donald Trump is a seriously rude dude, and I think individuals, that the voters know that. So whether or not they're going to vote because of that is something that the voters are already aware of. So some people don't. But what they're trying to do now is, of course, they're trying to appeal to their base in a way by getting into the emotional side of things on both sides. By the way, it isn't just the Democrats doing this, but the Democrats are the ones instigating this, so they're the ones at fault here. But I think that this is, of course, going to be yet another thing that is going to be divisive in this country. And if Donald Trump wins in 2020, what we'll see is people crying in the streets like 2016, except this time it'll be people being a lot more angry on that side anyway, the people that have been radicalized.
Right. So I get a couple questions on this topic here, and this is actually going to start to be something that I put regularly on the show. So first off, these first lines of hearings, do you think this helped or hurt the Democrats?
I think in my view, it hurt them because they didn't actually bring out anything that actually supported their allegation. In other words, normally, if you're going to pursue a legal action, you're going to want to start with at least something that is very damning. But unfortunately, they didn't have any of that, because if they did, they certainly would have started with it.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we keep hearing about is that the Democrats have to take a vote. Well, the House has to take a vote whether or not to have the impeachment. But the murmurings out there are the fact that they're not going to take the vote, that this is actually just going to be a drawn-out trial, or tribulation, rather, to try and, character affect the president like we talked about before. Do you think the Democrats take the vote or not?
Well, there's a few different ways this could go.
Mm-hmm.
They could try to extend this into a longer trial and make it an issue as the election approaches.
Mm-hmm.
They could agree to vote it down so that it doesn't make to the Senate if things go badly and they want to jump off a ship before it explodes, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can let it go to the Senate if they have a confidence that whatever the Senate does is not going to hurt them very much. But if they can't actually bring forth anything that is convincing, that convince some Republicans to vote against Trump in the Senate, then bringing it to the Senate would actually, in my view, be a disadvantage to the Democrats. Because the Republicans would simply hijack the investigation, as I said, and point out all the problems that the Democrats have in the Ukraine.
Well, and you brought this back full circle because the last question I want to ask on this before we go back to the live chat and see what they're talking about over there is, do you think that the Democrats have a strategy involved to try and flip the necessary Republicans in the Senate?
Well, they're currently going on an emotional appeal, which ideally should not work on politicians, but it does on some of them. What they're, in my view, what they're probably trying to do is they're trying to change public opinion to the point where, from their point of view, the senators that are maybe seeking reelection might want to vote with the people in order to garner popularity. But I don't see that as a solid strategy because currently, not having brought forth any solid evidence yet, it means that any reasonable senator should not be voting that this is something that the president is impeachable over.
Okay. Well, let's check back in with the live chat here before we talk about what's going to happen with the people who want to try and be on the other side of the vote. So, let's see. Who is America's first diplomat? That would be the president. Who sets up? Yeah, they're talking a lot about just diplomacy and everything over there.
Yeah, there's the president, but there's also the State Department, which manages a lot of a day-to-day diplomacy because the president is a very busy man. Now, of course, the State Department and the president are both advised by a number of career politicians and lobbyists, as well as some NGOs. And there are some conspiracy theories regarding certain NGOs pushing towards certain types of policies. But, yeah.
Well, it looks like Ron Helton actually has a disagreement with you here. It says Trump should not testify before Congress. It'll destroy the checks and balances. The burden of proof is on them, meaning the House of Representatives, and they're failing miserable. I can see that angle to it too. But
Well, I didn't say that he should testify. What I said is that if he does not confess, then they don't have any evidence unless there's something else that we don't know of, which they should have brought forward by now. But yeah, and he as a citizen actually has the right to remain silent, so he doesn't have to say anything if he doesn't want to.
right. Let's see, what else do we have in here? He said bad things about me on Twitter. Boo hoo. Must have been in relation to when Schiff was going on with Jovanovic.
Well, she had been previously posted to Somalia, so I can't imagine what then told her on Twitter that was highly offensive for a female diplomat having been sent to Somalia. It doesn't sound to me like she would have thin skin like that. I think it's rather the investigation trying to make a narrative here.
Some say that the Civil War will start the day after the election. We are talking about many things, including fish. That's sort of a weird series of comments there from Seawall, but I guess they're talking about fish. I don't know where that came from. I must have missed some messages here. But let's talk 2020. Now, the candidates that we have for the presidency coming up have been fairly quiet this week with everything happening with everything else there. But we do have a couple of things to talk about here, including some motion in the field. It looks like former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick is going to officially enter the Democrat field for the race now. For those of you who are not familiar, Deval Patrick came into power in Massachusetts very shortly after Barack Obama took over the presidency here. I didn't really know much about him at the time. I know a lot of people were highly in support of him, and that was for the most part after I stopped living there, so I didn't have a lot of opinion on that. But what do you think about this?
Well, the fact that I don't know a lot about him indicates to me that he probably doesn't have a lot of name recognition, which at this point, if you're entering the race, that's something that you really need. So I don't think that he's going to go very far unless he's got a lot of money behind it. But yeah.
Well, the same PACs that have all their money tied up in Elizabeth Warren right now do have some interest in him as well for the same reason, because he's a politician from the same state. So that'd be an interesting idea to see where the PACs go, whether they stay with Warren or they stay with Duvall.
Well, I think Warren is probably a lot more from their point of view, because Warren has a bigger name rivaling Bernie Sanders in his policies, and she also is relatable in some ways. Um, I don't know that much about Patrick, but Warren, of course, if she were to win, would be the first woman president. Meanwhile, Patrick, though being a man of color, got beaten to the punch by Obama on that.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about the progressive stack, Elizabeth Warren probably has the advantage.
Well, Warren has the person of color too behind her. Yeah, I had to. I had to.
Yeah, well,
So, speaking of Warren here, she's made a little bit of news here. She's first off, she's actually backing off Medicare for all, and the video clip I have queued up for a bit here. We'll talk about that in a bit here. Actually, there's some reasoning behind that. Pelosi brought up some of the ideas behind that as well, but I think that's the first admission that the progressive ideas are not going to work. That this agenda that they're trying to push forward isn't going to do anything, and possibly Warren thinks that the super PACs have it in the bag for her, so she's backing off so she can still appear to be somewhat of a moderate candidate for the general.
yeah.
I don't know if that's a feasible idea or not, but
Well, of course, the problem with Medicare for all is that it's expensive, and and backing off on that policy means that the tax increases required by a Warren administration would be less, which of course would mean that it wouldn't look so bad compared to, let's say, someone who's more fiscally conservative.
okay. Excuse me. Yeah, it looks like, I guess for me, from what I'm seeing of this is, I've seen a couple articles, and it looks like she's trying to move on to like what Pete Buttigieg is trying to put up for Medicare for all who want it, which is still expensive, but
Yeah, there are people that can pay for their own health care. They don't need to go on Medicare.
mhm.
So I think it'd be silly to put them on Medicare, because then you'd be giving people that, and in order for that to then be useful in any way and not to be a waste of money, you'd have to abolish private insurance, which would mean that if you really needed extra care,
Mhm.
it would be more difficult to get it.
Yes, and that's exactly it too. Plus, all the jobs that would be lost out of the private care industry. I mean, that's a
Now,
huge loss out of the private sector right there.
because of the way healthcare providers are set up, and the way hospitals are set up, there is a huge problem with pricing in these industries, and on how much things cost and how much things should cost. And it's a very complex issue that really makes very expensive. So I think what people should focus is on trying to restructure that system so that we actually have a workable healthcare economy. So they don't have to have the government put programs on everything.
Well, speaking of programs here, and speaking of the fact that this would be a less expensive option for Warren to have her health care implemented out, we do also have the fact that she has proposed a tax plan to go along with the wealth tax that she's been trying to implement from the beginning. I do wonder if she'll actually back off of this once she gets into this, but I mean, this is something that she's got to feed to the progressive base right now. But she has proposed a tax that for some individuals could raise their income tax over 100% based on the wealth and what they hold and earn. So,
I assume that this is as a tax bracket. So that, because the way the taxes work is that the percentage is not a percentage that's applied uniformly to all your income.
Mm-hmm.
It's a percentage that's applied, because I used to do taxes, it's a percentage that's applied to a certain amount of money. And then every money beyond that has a higher percentage. So it would mean that she's for, let's say, a maximum income that someone can have.
Yes, absolutely. And they tried to propose maximum wage not that long ago. I remember they were trying to propose that, and it kind of faltered in the system with the American popularity. But I could see this actually, like you had said, a maximum income that they could make. So having that tax there, capping what their income could be. But from what I've read about this as well, this seems to be something that has to do with wealth and value added. So.
Now, of course, there's a problem that if you tax the rich too much, then you end up with capital flight, where individuals that are really wealthy will just put all their money in offshore accounts, or they'll leave themselves. Now, of course, the U.S. has taken measures against this by making a deal with Switzerland to have transparency on the accounts of American citizens and green card holders, which of course upset a lot of individuals that try to have offshore accounts.
Oh, I
But,
can imagine.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that. That's a good thing to talk about. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like this entire primary season has been, it's been anti-gun, it's been healthcare for all, but one of the things that they've also been trying to do is criminalize being successful. And I don't like the direction that would lead us in. Especially with USAFE, they're working together with Swiss banking. I mean, that's been one of the big names in offshoring for as long as I can remember, and I'd actually never heard of that before. That they were trying to work with the Swiss government to do that. So
Yeah.
after
But
we're off mic, can you link me an article on that? Because I'd be interested to read about that.
This is something that happened many years back.
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to look it up because this is actually something that had affected my family in a way. So
Okay.
yeah, but this is something that happened a number of years back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with all this Medicare for all, with these tax hikes that go over 100% income, and all of the other things that we see, it's kind of interesting to think that the pundits say these people are too far left to be elected. They have to move to the center to get elected in a general. And the primaries are supposed to be for you to get your leftward base to get yourself in and moderate yourself for the center. But Face the Nation, I've got this clip here, actually started talking about this in a segment they did this past week as to whether or not, with candidates like Warren and Sanders, the Democrat Party is becoming too left to be elected. If you'll allow me, let's go ahead and see what that looked like.
All right.
Let's start off on 2020. As you just heard Anthony Salvanto lay out in the Battleground Tracker, there's some concern among Democrats that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren may be too liberal. President Obama got to something along these lines this week.
That's right. Friday night here in Washington at a gathering of liberal donors. Didn't call out any specific candidate or idea, but did warn that the country isn't necessarily in the mood to rip up the entire system when it comes to health care and immigration. So that's kind of a veiled message to voters and the Democratic activists. Maybe Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren are going a little too far. And I think that's not only reflected in what the former president said, it's reflected in the results of the elections the last few days here. Look at what happened in Louisiana last night. John Bel Edwards, moderate Democrat, anti-abortion, who has distanced himself from national Democrats, won in a squeaker just a few days after Andy Beshear won in Kentucky as a moderate as well. It's a reminder that if the party hopes to win back areas of the country that are trickier to prevail in, they're probably going to have to find a more moderate candidate to do it, and the polling is starting to reflect an understanding of that.
And it's interesting, Rachel, because Speaker Pelosi told me something similar on Friday when I talked to her, when I specifically asked about that signature health care issue. Listen in.
But I don't think that you can decide one day that in a matter of days nobody will have their private health insurance. I just don't see that as a path. And I do think that though people have their exuberance and their why and what excites them about running for office, and that has to be taken into consideration when we make judgments about their policies, because everybody knows that once you're elected, then you have to work together.
So there you hear a master legislator basically saying what you're being promised on the campaign trail is going to be really hard to put through into law.
Yeah, I mean, Pelosi and Obama both sending up a red flare right now to these liberals in the 2020 race. I mean, this is a woman who comes from San Francisco. She's as blue as you can be, but she's taken back the House. She has seen her moderate members take Republican districts that Trump won in 2016, and she knows that messages like Medicare for all and we're going to take your health insurance, that scares a lot of independent voters and a lot of Republican voters who are sick of Trump and want someone else to vote for, but can't see themselves voting for someone like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, who are promoting a lot of free things that people are worried about their own taxes and what that's going to do to their bottom line.
So, could NBC actually be talking some sense into trying to go rightward a little bit on the party?
I think they are making sense in that the Democrats certainly have become more socialist than might be acceptable to the American public. So in that sense, it could indeed lead to some problems down the line, getting votes, especially from more working class individuals who are actually hurt by many of the policies that the Democrats are putting through. The open border policies are hurting working class individuals and their ability to compete for jobs. What I don't approve of in this video is their use of the term liberal. Because when you talk about the Democrats taking away the choices that people could make in what kind of health insurance they might have, or in how they raise their children, or in how they want to protect themselves, more illiberal than it is liberal. But that's how the language has evolved in our society.
Well, yeah, it's not. The liberal or the left party has not been liberal for quite a while. It's become more authoritarian over time, and it's interesting to see the more liberality of the conservative party that's come along with this as well. We talked about it last week when I had Reese on, the fact that there was sort of a merger of convenience between the Libertarian Party and the Conservative Party because they have a common enemy. They have the progressive socialists. Yeah.
Type people.
But Reese brought up a good point when we talked about this last week, and that is the fact that, once the culture war is done, they're not going to be friends anymore after that.
That's true, because there are a lot of conservatives that are in favor of a lot of these social programs which libertarians oppose.
Mm-hmm.
So they are, in a way, an alliance of convenience. But this happens all the time, all throughout history, with every political party, essentially.
Well, and even in countries that we saw throughout various wars that we've had over the past years as well. I mean, how many alliances of convenience were there in both world wars? Countries that had no ideological similarities between them are lining up. Japan and Germany, I think, in World War II would have been a great one because, they have absolutely nothing in common at all except for common enemies.
Yeah, you could say that, yes. Or even Germany and Italy in World War II.
Yeah, that's a good point, too.
Because if you actually examine the viewpoints of versus the National Socialists, they're actually very different in many of the things. It's just that they have some things that they agree upon, which put them into conflict with the Bolsheviks and the liberals.
So, yeah, to the point that they're saying yes. And what bothers me the most when we look back, and I didn't want to go into the Groiper Wars anymore because I think that's fading, and I think that's a really divisive, and I don't know where I stand on that to begin with, so I can't opine. But what I'm seeing with that, we're starting to see this alliance of convenience end, and some of the more militant members of the Conservative Party are trying to wrestle it back away from the libertarianism, in which we're going to start to see the Civil War rift show back up in the Republican Party.
Well, what you have now is in social media, you've got the grifters against the more uh, accepting sort of socially liberal, fiscally conservative types that
That's me.
yeah, well, that are trying to really try to say we can all get together on this and on that, and then the groypers come in and they say, well, what about this, what about that? And unfortunately many of the conservatives, instead of actually standing up for their own principles, they simply try to deflect the conversation, and I don't think that's helpful to the discourse, and I don't think that's helpful to actually coming to a consensus in any way, that is.
All right. Well, before we hijack this topic and go off in a completely different direction, I'm going to ask you the three questions I've asked you once before on this show, but the same questions I always ask every week. So, first off, based on statistics on what you've seen this past week in the news and in the polling, who do you think has the best chance of becoming the Democrats' nominee for 2020?
I think it would probably be at this point Elizabeth Warren. She's got more vigor than Bernie, and Biden is sort of apart at seams. So she's currently, in my view, probably the most popular there.
Okay. So, if you had to have a president from the current field, now including Deval Patrick, of people who are currently running right now, say that Trump couldn't pull it off, if he had stroked out or something and Pence couldn't pull it off, if one of these people has to be the president, which one is the lesser of 18 evils?
Tulsi Gabbard. I think I said this last time, but I think she actually is reasonable enough to come on compromises, and she actually isn't interested in passing policies that would completely destroy the country, such as unrestricted open borders.
Plus, she's super hot.
Your words, mine.
Yeah, that gray streak, man, just does it for me. Okay, pure entertainment value, no statistics, no policy prescriptions. Which one of the 18 candidates that are still currently in the field do you want to see on the debate stage next to Trump next November?
What if, can I pick someone who might run but hasn't announced it yet?
Are you talking Hillary?
Yeah, just Hillary 2.0 boogaloo.
I'll allow it.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what the live chat has to say before we move into the last topic. Ban government from healthcare. That's something we need to do. We have a lot of 1024th jokes going on there. Ron Helton's never heard of Deval Patrick. Consider yourself lucky. I still have a good portion of Massachusetts heritage, so I got to hear about that. Seawall says, fun fact, these billionaires rarely earn more in wage than their secretaries. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, actually. I mean, what is Bezos
they have it all tied up in other ways to get money, such as certain investments and employee benefits and things like that. So, because they don't want to get taxed, so they have to find ways to get around that.
I think Bezos makes like 80 grand a year is what his actual wage is.
Yeah, the rest is tied up in maybe stocks in his own company or other types of investments. I'd have to see the breakdown on that before I could make a definitive conclusion.
Seawall congratulates me on being in the smallest group politically in the United States, but, you know, that's where I stand. Socially conservative and fiscally liberal are 3 to 4 times more common. Yeah, that's part of the problem that we have in Congress right now with spending. And it looks like Ron Helton is having some computer issues, so we hope that you get to stay through the rest of the show. But let's talk about hell, and by hell I mean California. Now, the
Yeah.
state of California has begun rolling out independent contractor laws. First, they rolled out a law a couple months ago that, or it was only a few weeks ago, rather. Wow, this news cycle really distorts your perception of time. A few weeks ago, California rolled out laws for independent journalists, freelance style, in which if you are considered a freelance journalist and not employed, then you are only allowed to write 35 articles per year, which, a lot of these people are writing articles left and right and submitting them all over the place to all sorts of companies. Most
I
of
don't
them
think
write,
they can enforce that.
yeah. I was gonna say most of them write like 7 articles a week, which is nuts to me, but that's how they pay the bills anyway.
Yeah.
And now California is also rolling out new proposals to force owner-operator truckers and rideshare employees, especially, to become employed by their companies rather than owning their own businesses and independently signing on to companies as well. So, according to Tim Pool, this could destroy about 70,000 jobs. And given the population and the amount of freight that has to go to California, not to mention the amount of people that don't own a car in Los Angeles, I could actually see that. That's a reasonable number to me. In fact, I think that's actually kind of on the low side. So, what have you seen on this so far?
Well, what I think is that this obviously has probably some backing from big corporations, where there's somebody wringing their hands about how much money they're going to make by centralizing these things back into the industry. Now, of course, the problem is that if this is actually caused by some type of abuse that has happened somewhere, I don't think it's something that should be put on the entire state, because if a problem occurred somewhere where someone was a bad Uber driver and was being abusive,
Mm-hmm.
that in my view should be solved locally, as I said, and then the rest of the state can do what they want. But instead, they just have to do this one size fits all application, and as someone mentioned, unions as well benefit from this, and all these individuals that otherwise would be working independently, now they have to uh, find a big corporation or a big union that will let them join.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is very strange, because you think that as more socialist types, they'd be happy about people being self-employed, but they're actually more in favor of what I'm not going to say that this is a serious comparison, but what the fascists would be in favor of, which is unionizing everything and putting everything into these big mega corporations. So there you go.
Well, and when I look at this too, I mean, what I saw out of this right away when I first started looking into this was healthcare. There's no way for California to enforce a mandatory healthcare law through employers if people are going and being on their own and just kind of throwing an article at a magazine every week, or getting in the Uber, turning on their phone and waiting for a ride to him. They're independent contractors. They don't have to fall into the same lines as with, if Uber went through and said, okay, well, here's your what is it? Not 1099. Here's your 1040. Here's go ahead and fill this out. You're an employee now, and now Uber has to provide health care, which is, I think, part of the reason that's holding Uber up right now is that they don't have to offer any sort of health care because their people aren't employees. I mean, they're clerical staff, but that's it.
I'll tell you this, on the mandatory health care, and that was on the books in the law,
Mm-hmm.
and every year would have to come on the Affordable Care Act healthcare mandate. It would be the taxmen, that the tax preparers, that is, that would be required to do the due diligence to figure out if someone has or does not have taxation on their healthcare, because it is involved in the taxation process. So essentially, it means that the people are now responsible for their healthcare, and required by the government to have healthcare, now have to pay extra money for someone to look at all these forms and fill out all these forms for them, so that then the IRS doesn't go after them. In other words, it gives a lot more money being spent into places that normally it shouldn't be spent in. So it's actually a big waste of money for the average person to have this stuff as a requirement to them.
Well, and I have to wonder too if this has something to do, going back to on the healthcare aspect of it, of California being out of money and being in so much debt to the federal government. I mean, at some point, especially if the Trump presidency goes on, I think that they're going to get called on their debt, because we could turn around and put that debt that they owe to the federal government into the national debt and try and roll that back a little bit. So my thought behind this, when I look at it, is the fact that, okay, these people are independent contractors. They don't have their employer health care, so they're going through the California exchanges, and California is subsidizing that health care for them, and that's got to be getting expensive for California to have these people.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And the problem is that despite all these expenses, despite all these government programs, there's still many California, many thousands of people that in any other state they'd be able to afford to live someplace, but in California they can't even afford to rent a home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, homelessness is rampant there. And I could see Uber as being a sort of a solution for homelessness as well. I mean,
yeah. And it's a big state too, so you'd think there'd be plenty of space, but that doesn't seem to be the problem. The problem is that they've got all these regulations that make homes very expensive to be up to code.
So, could this catch on federally?
I don't think it's going to. I think that what's going to happen is that because of the unpopularity of this, there's likely going to be advocacy groups and political action committees, as well as lobbyists, who are going to be against this type of change. Now, if the Senate and the House both have a Democratic majority, then they might be able to push something like this through, but we'll see what happens.
I guess that's just my fear of all of this is, it's going to get tried in California, and maybe it'll throw some money back into the black for the state, which would be a miracle for California at this point. But then they turn around and say,
now that you mention it, this is actually a big problem, because what people do is that, let's say you live in Oregon next to California and you want this done in your state, but let's say the people of the state are actually not in favor of it. So what you do instead is you vote for people to go to the federal government to override the state's ability to make its own laws, and then you simply, by going over their heads, you ruin the state's ability to do that. Because it used to be senators would be elected by the state government to go there, but now they're not. So essentially what you could do is individuals who are in the federal government, who are not accountable to the state governments, could all together and rewrite the Constitution to get rid of all of the state's rights if they wanted to. And that's the situation we're at now politically.
and that is a scary thought as well, because I mean, independent contracting is one of the backbones of this country. It's part of what helps us get out of the union trap and helps us keep moving forward as a country, especially if you're out of work. I mean, Uber revolutionized what it means to be out of work at this point. Or, if somebody, I have a friend that drives Uber, and she does that because her passion is photography. She does cosplay photography, which is such a niche market. I mean, you've got to have a supplemental income at that. So you can take your time, you can focus on your passion, and then you can still make money and keep the roof over your head.
Yeah.
But that's what I have on that. Go ahead.
It just gives people less options to take. So it certainly is not liberal, and is not in the principle of the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. as the founding fathers formulated it.
But that's what I have on that. We're going to check the live chat one more time here. So get your questions in now if you want to have them before the end of the show here. So Sewell gives his half-track noises get louder when he thinks of his old home state, which he used to live in California. He told me. He said it right on stream. So we're not outing him for anything here. Yeah, and he kind of beat us to the punch. As not only that, but truckers and sharing service. That must have been when we were talking about freelancers. He says that unions were the big pushers of this, which I kind of saw a little bit of that before we came in here. And now they want to regulate unions out of existence. There definitely should not be any government union. Yeah, that's a completely different story. And I could make an entire hour-long ed talk just on that, on government unions. Ron Helton says allow police and firefighters to be privatized. I don't know about that one. That one makes me nervous.
If it works in your community, then sure. If it doesn't work, then don't. That's what I say.
Well, the only thing that makes me nervous about privatized police is that the government makes the law and the government should be responsible for the enforcement. The fire department is another story, but the police, I think, does need to be a government agency. I think that's the only way to make that work. Otherwise, you have widespread spread corruption.
I guess it all depends on the situation.
Yeah. But that's all that I have for that here. But as always on this show, we try to end the show on a positive note. So, Anavultus, tell us about a hobby that you have that has nothing to do with work or politics. It could be a book that you've picked up, an album that you like to listen to, a video game that you tried, just something that helps you unwind at the end of this day of political madness.
Well, I developed a martial art for the use of unusually heavy objects, such as sledgehammers. So that's something that I am a grand master of. I developed it specifically in preparation for my fight with John from Gen Gap, but that ended up falling through.
Are you saying that John from Gen Gap is a heavy object?
No, I'm saying that if the sword were heavy, I'd be able to swing it. If it were really heavy, I'd be able to swing it, is what I'm saying.
Does that have anything to do with the picture that you have in the background of your natural rights video?
The one that's a response to the comment?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a Photoshop of a sword fight, but with a sword replaced by a sledgehammer.
I was wondering what was going on with that.
Well, I had originally made it for another video where I actually discussed the martial art that I developed.
Well, I want to thank the audience for taking the time to check this out live on all of the platforms that we transmit to. And if you couldn't catch this live or you're just catching us up at the end, the links are all down below where you can catch this on demand over on YouTube or over on BitChute. Or you can catch us once again back on the audio platform that comes up next day every morning. So you can catch us on the go wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us. Please do remember, if you are listening to this on iTunes, leave us that 5-star rating and a good review. That helps us move up the charts. Lastly, we are proudly partnered with the Freedom Scoop Media Group, and if you know any writers that would like to write for a free speech platform, go ahead and email me. That's edsblogtwitter@gmail.com, and we will see if we can get you a sample article and see if we can't get you published. As we always say over on... Well, I did forget something here. Why don't you tell us, even though it's linked in the description below, where they can find you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube at Anavultus, as is spelled in the title of this stream anyway. You can also find me on BitChute under the same name. And you can find me on Twitter under the same name as the Twitter handle, where I automatically post this. Now, of course, if you want to contact me more directly, probably the fastest way to do so would be on Discord. So I am present on the server that Jay Edgar uses, as well as the server from Gen Gap as well. And if you want to support me, you can always donate on Patreon to me also. at Anavultus. So there you go. That's how you can reach me.
And as we always say on this channel, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Anavultus, why don't you give us a last word?
Oh, always try deeply about politics. Never look at the surface, never follow the outrage train. Always think, what are the deeper implications of this? How does this affect how we do politics in the long run? How does this affect our society? That's my philosophical advice.
Thanks for coming, and take care, everyone.